Hello, my fellow listeners and lovers of knowledge. Welcome to the Open Sea Odyssey podcast. My name is Josiah Vogel, and as usual, I am joined by my co-host, Kylan Bain. In today's episode, we will be discussing the desires of humanity to maintain what currently is, the desires to push for progress, and the desire to return to the past, what can easily be described as an Ouroboros, a snake devouring its own tail on a loop, or to some degree a pendulum swinging back and forth to extremes. We also delve into some Jungian theory to better understand the mindset behind these desires. As usual, we will be looking at these topics through the lenses of philosophy and psychology. So, without any further ado, welcome to our discussion on the Open Sea Odyssey podcast.
Not to go into the absolute deep rabbit hole that we did last time. Structuralism. Okay, I'm not going to touch that word again for the rest of the...
No, it's funny. Although, speaking of structuralism, I watched the...
Oh shit, I did it.
I watched the Matrix trilogy.
Oh yeah.
Last week.
Oh nice.
I watched this video on breaking down the difficulty of people understanding the complex story of Matrix 2 and 3. And I was like, okay, I already know that these films had a lot of philosophy to them. Mm-hmm. But now that I've had this laid out for me, I want to watch these movies. And I watched all three. And it's basically an argument showing the first movie is just the typical hero's journey.
Right.
The idea of finding enlightenment thinking. The second movie is introducing, well, the Enlightenment falls short, so post-structuralism. And then the third movie is kind of like a post-structuralism of saying you can't stand on post-structuralism because of all of its shortcomings, therefore you need to step through it. And I was like, this is amazing. I think it's BS, but I think as a film, it's got to be one of the most compelling and best arguments for a post-structuralist idea and worldview I've ever seen.
And it does it in such a creative, artistic, expressive way rather than just like pure cerebral information.
Kind of like we do now where it's like, I'm going to tell you how you need to think about the world. It was just like, well, I mean, that's the whole reason I guess people didn't like Matrix 2 and 3 was it was covert in answering all the questions it set up in the first one. So they were like, well, we don't want to just answer the questions because what made the first one popular was that it was mysterious.
Right.
So in answering all the questions, they kept it mysterious so it didn't just outright answer all the questions. You kind of have to figure it out and deep dive it yourself.
Yeah.
Which was cool. But yeah. So it's funny you bring up structuralism because it was very interesting watching that movie on a structuralist argument to a post-structuralist to a post. Yeah. Or transcendental post-structuralist.
Is that the official term?
I don't know. I had to look it up, and I guess it's fairly recent. It's not an old idea. I even asked Miller, and he was just like, never heard of that before. And I was just like, okay. There's a chance it doesn't even exist. I don't know.
Here we are on the end of that line of the defined. Yeah.
I don't know. I got done with it, and I don't know what we want to talk about today, but when I got done with the movies, I was like, man, it's so interesting to see that post-structuralism has taken over the world. I can't remember if we talked about this last time.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that it has found so much fault with itself that people are, I mean, it's what we're saying now. Mm-hmm. It's what people are like, this doesn't work. And yet there seems to be kind of like a dog backed into a corner, as we described last time, with this utopian idea of trying to say it will work.
Right.
But ironically, the thing that watching those films and studying more after watching it, I started to realize that I think the thing that's also adding to the problem is you have people that are saying, see, this doesn't work. We must return to the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. Whereas I agree with John Vervaeke of there are some brilliant things and tools from the Enlightenment that are good.
Right.
But we shouldn't go back because it's what led to post-structuralism. So for me, it's like, okay, we need to move past this onto whatever the new thing is with all of its shortcomings of whatever that's going to be.
Yeah, and kind of connecting two of your ideas to the notion that everything presently is always better than what it has been.
Yeah.
And not being able to extract what has been to propel one into the future or into the experienced present, I think is a cultural and sociological flaw that's happened for the past 100, 200 years. That's, I think, rippling outward into individual identity crisis. A lot of the work that I do on rite of passage rituals is leaning into that of how knowledge and wisdom is transferred within a society.
Yeah.
Rituals being a archaic, but I would even make the argument as it is a contemporary expression of that wisdom transferring. That in and of itself is just taking what has been and applying it to a present context in a formal, structured way, and we don't have that. And so you have ideas and you have thoughts and structures that say, this is the best that it has been. All that has been is absolutely horrible and doesn't need to be done again, completely undermining the rich gold that has actually existed in the past.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think that just kind of connecting those two notions that you brought up in separate instances. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and what's crazy is for post-structuralism, it would really explain why, to your research, why there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rites of passage for social identity, because any of that would be a meta-narrative,
Right.
which is to be negated and deconstructed in post-structuralism. So, as we had mentioned before, this just becomes a, how do you live in something that's constantly having to be, how do you live in a house that every single time you put it together, you have to deconstruct it? Like, it's rough, and yet for some reason, to your point, because of this mentality of what you're connecting with, what has been brought up of thinking now is better, the past is bad, we want to hold on to this for some reason. And it's just like, well, I mean, it's kind of the idea of the social construct things where you're just like, well, if everything's a social construct and you're just saying that these ones that we have are just being used with power to enforce on other people, you trying to say that that should be negated, but then replace it as people should be allowed to do this, this, and this, that's not post-structuralist in the sense of you're negating it to where it's no one has power, there's a balance of power. That's, I know people can't see my hands, but that's one side having more power and the other having less. And instead of doing the post-structuralist model of bringing down the one, negating the larger one to even it out with the lower one, instead that's just them going, no, we're now going to enforce these new social norms and conventions on everybody else, which means it's not post-structuralist, it's what post-structuralists will call a sleight of hand power maneuver.
It's also playing that hit the gopher game. As soon as you think you get it, it pops up in another hole and you hit it again. And you're always dancing with the structure or the control. One thing I will add to that, too, is I urge people to look at how we, in a Western culture, treat elders.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because
for sure.
Traditionally, that's where the meta-narrative is held. Like, if you look at an archaic society where we're visions interpreted with the body and a council of elders, and that doesn't happen anymore. They're kind of ushered off into nursing homes and facilities and kind of forgotten about. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's the catalyst for this thing that we're talking about, but more so a sign of it and a symptom of it.
Yeah. Well, and what's crazy is it'd be interesting to do the literature research on it. But I was having a conversation yesterday talking about the individual I was talking with is a baby boomer,
Mm-hmm.
and talking with them about how, well, your parents' generation is really the, to me, obvious generation that started this whole parenting style of just do as I say, not as I do, and also started looking for certainty
Right.
in things, which is like, okay, well, that's a loss of wisdom, because as talking with Miller, as a guitar player, if I go to 3 great guitar players to say, okay, how did you guys all become great guitar players? I'm going to get 3 different sets of information.
Right.
And the solution isn't saying one of them for certain is going to work. Instead, it's taking that information from those 3, the wisdom of it, and saying, okay, how is this going to apply to my journey for whenever I run into similar issues of which they have given me knowledge of? I can navigate that situation. It's not certainty. It's not guaranteed at all. And yet, for some reason, I think about the silent generation where this mentality of do as I say, not as I do comes along. You then have the baby boomers who, it amazes me how much, like with Anxious Generation from Jonathan Haidt, they will go on about all the things that they did growing up, how they were able to go around the neighborhood riding their bikes without a care in the world, stay up late, get into trouble. And yet it's the same generation along with Gen X who are parenting millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha who are sticking tablets in front of their faces.
Right.
When they're the ones saying, well, back in my day,
Yeah.
as if we should be doing that. But those same generations are the ones that created these mentalities, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah, and maybe that's their interpretation of do as I say, not as I do.
Maybe.
And I want to highlight the distinction between the true acquisition of wisdom and knowledge versus imitation. And I think with the two that you pose, of somebody just taking a piece of information, say that, let's take the guitar player, they go to one guitar player and they imitate everything that that guitar player does. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to become a good guitar player themselves. Rather, if you take a variety of experience and you acquire the gold, the alchemical process of turning this kind of mumbo jumbo of experiences and pitfalls into how they rose up, and the continual cycle of chaos to order to chaos to order, taking the parts of their redemption, how they did it, and applying it to your personal context.
Yeah.
I think that is the true acquisition of knowledge within a variety of contexts. And with the guitar player, you're just taking all those contexts of where they got it right.
Yeah.
How can I get it right like them as many times as possible?
Yeah. Yeah. See, I was thinking you were going to go more into Kierkegaardian
Go for it.
model, because he talks about, and Nietzsche kind of touches on this a little bit too, which is the difference between a imitator, a copycat, and a master.
Right.
Which is, to use your idea of the guitar player, yeah, if you could just do everything the guitar player who's your teacher can do, it doesn't make you a master.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes you a copycat, an imitator. The example I like to use is if you have a swordsmith and he has 2 students, and one of them is able to do everything that he teaches them to a T, that doesn't make him a master. Yet his second student is able to do everything that he's taught to a T, but is also really understanding the metals that he's using, the different forges, the environment of which it's in, to be able to create better tools, better weapons. That is mastering the craft.
Well, and I'm actually really happy you brought that up too, because I would make the argument that, like, there's a... Have you seen the self-portraits on the timeline of Picasso, from his first self-portrait to his last self-portrait?
Probably a long time ago, yeah.
Okay. Well, I urge anybody who's listening to this to also go and look at this timeline of self-portraits, because I would say, out of any other person that you could bring up, Picasso exemplifies this idea visually better than anyone else. His first self-portrait is very theme to the times. He's following the footsteps of giants at this point. He's trying to imitate and learn and master his craft, and it's very much like the other portraits and artwork that adjoin the time period that he's in. Well, as you go out through his timeline, his last one is completely abstract and obtuse.
Yeah.
Because he's learned the rules and learned how to break the rules to create something new.
Yeah.
And so I would make the argument, and this is seen within a lot of literature, like stories and myths as well, is that the hero learns the rules and then learns where the rules fall short and breaks those rules that fall short. And that I think is more of the Nietzschean and Kierkegaardian sense of mastery, is taking a set of skill or a skill set and learning it and then almost unlearning it.
Yeah.
And moving beyond the skill set itself, that the full integration of that knowledge.
Yeah. Well, and what's so interesting about that concept when it comes to art is what defines it as good.
Right.
I watched this brilliant video from a guy, a YouTuber called Greg Glinstone, and he was talking about the art of critique and how you can have 95% of a populace rate an art piece well. That does not make that art piece objectively good. It makes it subjectively more good based off of a wide group of preferences compared to 5%. But of course, you do have to point out not everyone actually rates an art piece. Not everyone actually even gives why or a critique for it. But the idea of good and bad is very difficult because a lot of Picasso's work I'm not much of a fan.
Oh.
I struggle with the abstract.
Like Cubism.
Yeah, a lot. I like realism quite a lot. I like Renaissance artwork, which is a little abstract, but...
Which is interesting because that's where he starts.
Yes.
He starts in that school, and I really love looking at archaic African art.
Okay.
The masks, and you can see that really influences him and his depiction of faces specifically. And that's, I think, some people call him the forefather of Cubism, but Cubism came around when he was around too. So this was an ongoing thing that was happening. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody who's listening, but he used that as a means of exploring the unknown. And I just love it. I love talking about Picasso with this topic as well, because you can get tangible, physical representations of that mastery, which I think is incredibly fascinating to see in comparison, to cross-analyze.
Yeah. Well, and I've never really been one that's good at looking at an art piece, and then if someone was to ask me, so what is it saying? I'd just be like, it's an art piece. What is it supposed to say?
Right.
Whereas one of my favorite printmakers is Gustave Dior, if you know who that is. He's done a lot of prints for the Divine Comedy, which is one of the reasons why I love his artwork, because it's so fascinating to read Dante's Inferno so much and then see these prints and you're like, it's not what I was thinking.
Right.
But that's really cool. And just to see some of the things that are even difficult to visualize put down like that, even though it's just his interpretation. Yeah, it's just brilliant. But yeah, I've never been really good at that. It's kind of like ever since the 60s and 70s, thank you postmodernism, we've had this idea that all art is political.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
And I'm just like, is it? I mean, Hannah, my wife, she went to school for art, and it was amazing how much, when I would sit in on some things, people would make stuff and they'd be like, I just thought this was cool. I don't know why I made this. And then you would have professors, I won't name any names, that would immediately go, so what's the message behind it?
That's an interesting thing. That's an interesting thing that's only happened probably within these last few hundred years. Because arts, and I love the intersection of talking about art as a means of talking about ideas, because art is so intuitive. And there is that intuitive level that we don't get with ideas.
Yeah.
But I think ideas and philosophies come out of that same place. At least for me, I don't claim any of the thoughts I have. I think they come up from this intuitive place that's the same place that I do where I'm writing poetry, or the same place that it comes from where I'm writing something on the guitar. And what an interesting interaction or reaction to a piece of art is to ask it what its meaning is.
Yeah.
As if the meaning came first. Because if we're really, and it's contrary to post-structuralism in and of itself, because if the meaning is relative, then the art should come first, rather than the meaning being a predisposition to the art. And so if we're going to analyze it and say that your meaning should have come before the creation of the art, but we're in this post-structural world where any meaning can be applied to anything, that hyper-relativism, then that's completely contradictory.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because post-structuralism, Matrix 3 illustrates this very well with post-structuralism, where it's like the word love has no meaning. We're the ones that give it meaning, and then anything can use that and take from that meaning what they will, which for me is just like, well, this kind of feels like arguing a chicken or the egg problem.
Right.
Like, do we have the word love because we just said LOVE? What does that mean? Oh, this is what it means. Yeah, let's give it this. Or did we see something and then give it a name? Some ways, I know probably theologians would be an outroar over this, but in some ways I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
It's not pragmatic, where it's just like, well, this is what I know it to mean, so this is how it's used. This is the language we share to be able to understand that. But yeah, to your point, I do find it fascinating when it comes to art, where it's like a lot of the songs I write, as you listed out, is, well, it was just intuitive. And then my brain goes, now we got to write lyrics for this. What are we going to write about? And it's like,
Right. Now you actually have to create it.
Yeah. And now I just have to ask myself, okay, well, listen to this. What is the feel of this song? What is it? As you said, I have to ask it, what is it trying to convey? And then write something, hopefully, that is complementary to that. But at the same time, I mean, you have Pumped Up Kicks by, what is it? Foster the Kids or whatever.
Yeah.
Where it's the most happiest jingle ever, but it's about the Columbine shooting.
You know that he's a jingle writer.
Yeah, I knew that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Which is crazy, and it's just like, that's where, for post-structuralists, where it's like inverting or subverting is genius, because it's like, okay, that's very well done. Like, kind of the Police is every breath you take. Where it's just like, this is not a happy song.
No. And if anybody has pushback on me saying that a lot of knowledge is intuitive, if you've ever gotten into a flow state, I would say that that's direct evidence of what I'm saying. That you, I don't know. I think I personally think, for me, it's egocentric to think that my thoughts are my own.
Yeah, really.
And people ask, and I'll maybe write a good paper every once in a while on the off chance that I do, and I get a good grade or some good feedback from a professor or something, and it always kind of tinges me the wrong way because I don't feel like that's mine.
Yeah.
I feel like it was given.
Yeah.
It's such a weird thing to talk about too, because people are like, "Who gave it to you? What voice in your head gave it to you, Kylan?"
Yeah, which is like, you're asking the wrong question. Because when we, especially in our culture, if we think creative, we think someone who creates something original, something from scrap that's not been done before. Which is kind of crazy to think, 'cause it's like, well, nothing hasn't ever not been done before. We're just exploring it in ways we hadn't.
Right.
And for me, I wouldn't say I'm creative, but I'm not traditionally creative in that sense. I'm very good at being able to take two different things and make connections between those two that you wouldn't always pick out to begin with.
You're a synthesizer.
Yeah. Which is like, okay, but it's two ideas that aren't mine,
Right,
to create something new that people are like, wow, that's so thoughtful and profound. And to your point, my brain's just like, why? I just synthesized these two.
Right. Well, and what a beautiful image of what a human is.
Yeah.
A bunch of circumstance and context coming together in a unique way, bringing something that has never been done before. And I wrote this sentence recently. I think it pertains to this conversation, and I'm going to try to recite it the best I can. But before something can be defined particularly, it has to be everything undefined unparticularly. And so when you're dealing with this intuitive nature of knowledge, you're dealing with this infinium of potential, this pool of potential that I think we are constantly swimming in. And then every once in a while it becomes actual.
Yeah.
But before that thing was actualized, it had to be everything that it was and wasn't unactualized.
Yeah. Well, and I think I might be stepping a little too far. Richard Dawkins in The Selfish Gene talks about, we've had this idea of, oh, you act so much like your father or your mother or your great grandmother, your great grandfather, yada, yada, yada. And yet in his book, he talks about how even by the 70s, they were able to see that there is, I'll use his analogy, you have within you genetically a set of volumes, like a library. And it is randomly chosen between your mom's genes and your dad's genes and their parents' genes of which volumes are passed on to you. It's like, so contrary to Spencer in the early 20th century, late 19th century, this idea of just being a blank slate. It's like, okay, well, there's this intuitive idea that we have to have some connecting cause and effect,
right,
to use Aristotle and just empiricism and science in general. And yet we had all these theories, and then we start delving into it, and we're like, oh, as Richard Dawkins points out, it is kind of like a library of a division on which genes from your parents and their parents are going to be passed on.
Yeah.
To make up the not blank slate of what we are, that then is able to have the wiggle room to do what is needed for survival, to create new genes to then pass on to your children or their children, etc. So yeah, I would actually agree. Again, I might be stepping a little too far here, where it's like, I would agree that it's intuitive, and then we find something, which again, based off of Jonathan Haidt's research with his book The Righteous Mind and many others that he points at in that, the confirmation bias, I don't remember being told exactly where that came from. Like, I was told who, but not what made it. Do you know what made confirmation bias? Peter Wasson created this study where he had people come in and said, okay, I'm going to give you a triplet of digits. You are then going to tell me and manipulate these and ask if it's within the rule, because there is a rule to this pattern. And then once you think you figured out the rule, tell me, and I will tell you whether or not you figured out the rule to these triplet of numbers. So in other words, you would get 2, 4, 6. Your brain then goes, okay, I'm going to manipulate it 4, 6, 8. And you ask, is that correct? I say, yes. You go, okay, I'm going to do it again. 8 or 6, 8, 10. Is this correct? I say, yes. And you go, they all have to be even numbers. I say, no, that is not the rule. You go, okay. 110, 132, and 138. I say yes. Or sorry, and then all you do is add 2 more digits to each number. And I say yes. And you go, okay, it has to be by a number of 2. And I say, no, that is not the rule. To your point, what they found, this is why it's called confirmation bias.
Yeah.
They already created the theory as to what the rule was, and then immediately sought to prove that theory instead of disprove their theory to see if it was incorrect. All they had to do was just make a number that went 2, 3, 1, and they would have found out the rule was each number had to be higher than the previous one. That's it. That's why it's called confirmation bias, was because they would come up with the theory, they would test it, and then they would claim they knew the theory.
Right.
So yeah, to your point, that aligns with it, because we immediately just make the judgment of what something is, find evidence to confirm it, don't find anything to disconfirm it, and then move on.
Well, and it's interesting, and I'll tie back to the confirmation bias in a second, but a part of that genetic idea coming from Dawkins, there's a Jungian aspect to that. And in the Red Book, I believe, Jung talks very much about the unconscious being almost the psychological genetics of our ancestors going back, and drawing on that intuitively to manifest new ideas. And that's the continual rebirth of symbol and myth, is drawing back on our ancestors and the experience of them psychologically coming into fruition once again through us, and the repetition, Mircea Eliada's kind of cyclical time. But I would say that confirmation bias is the ego's interaction with the intuitive. We're defining parameters on a wealth of information that's endless, primordially out of survival, because if you didn't define it, you didn't know what it was, and it could kill you. But contemporarily, I think that it's a little more nuanced, because we're not fighting saber-toothed tigers anymore. And that runs the risk of dualism, confirmation bias. These patterns that lead one into delusion coming out of our conscious mind's need to confirm or know and be right and prove the knowledge that it acquires, rather than inquisitively aspire for what may be actually more applicable to the experience.
Yeah. It's funny because I agree with Jung, but if Dawkins was sitting here, he'd be like, oh, get out of here with all that mystical mumbo jumbo. What it really is that an event happens that triggers your genes or your genetics to find something familiar of what it's dealt with in the past, and it reacts to that. Which is like, okay, Dawkins.
What's really funny about that too is because, and Jung would say, You're right.
Yeah, I know. He's just very more mystical in his
Yeah.
way of expressing it. But it's funny because with what you just mentioned then, if we didn't have a tag for it, we would die. That would mean the word came after, not first. So that would mean love, according to the post-structuralist, doesn't gain its power and its influence by us constantly putting new things in to define it. It means that the feelings, emotions, or stuff involved with love came first before the word. And then with the word, we've used other things to better define and understand that.
And I'll argue that. I'll fight on that side. Because how did we develop cerebrally? We didn't start prefrontally with words and language. We started way down on the brainstem with sensory and emotional perception, and then only up till we evolved on the prefrontal level were we able to describe language and word. And whether we like it or not, there's a social aspect to this too. You wouldn't need a word if you didn't have another person that you needed to describe that thing to.
Yeah.
And so up into the point in our development where we were prefrontally developed and we lived in groups, I don't know what language looked like. And I think it was a much more present experience for that individual who didn't have those capacities yet. Up until those capacities were developed, then it became more abstract.
Right. Well, as John Vervaeke and some linguists have argued, you look at the books on my shelf going back to the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s. If I were to drop you an English speaker into the UK during the 16 and 1700s, you would have a very hard time understanding the English speakers, and they would have a hard time understanding you because the idea of the language that is being used has changed so much. So, I mean, not that I tend to go into this topic for this, but when you think about LGBTQ+, they're not talking about a word and then giving it definitions.
Right.
They're talking about what they're feeling and then giving a word to it. So to your point, that's falling in line with this same idea. And that would make sense. Have you read Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary? So he's philosophically looking at the world through the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain. And yes, there's a lot between them in common. It's called hemispheric lateralization.
Right.
But the things in where they differ, kind of like, for instance, as Jordan Peterson and many others have pointed out, male and females might have 86% in common, but that would mean that 14% is drastically different because it's no overlap whatsoever. This is where the differences do not overlap. So that's what he's looking at in terms of the left and the right. And the left hemisphere is way more analytical, more word-oriented, more rational focused. In other words, it tends to see the world as just being objects to interact with. Whereas the right side of the brain tends to see things as more gestalt, more colorful, more living. So for instance, if you were to turn off the left hemisphere and turn on and only leave the right being looked at and look at the sun, it would see it as a living being compared to the left, which is just going to see it as an inanimate object of no life. And he argues, taking it philosophically, if I'm understanding him correctly, that the left side of the brain even sees humans and other animals this way. It's just inanimate objects. And that's what's great between the two, is that they're creating this ability to be like, no, it's a living being, but it's also just an object or a means to an end, or yada, yada, yada. So I find that fascinating too, to your point, because I would say, as you were pointing out, the right hemisphere is more in line with how we were before language than the left hemisphere is.
And would that make intuition a father or forefather to knowledge?
Well, I mean, again, if we're going off of Hume's idea that reason is a slave of the passions, what he's saying is intuitions come first and then reasoning.
Right.
And reasoning just is used to back up our intuition, not to actually challenge or find what is, quote, true.
And that's confirmed in
quote.
self-confirmation bias.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I would say that that is correct. Intuition comes 1st. And this is why Emil Gilchrist goes on about when people say, well, we shouldn't trust our intuition. It's like, well, that's dumb. That would be like having a magic trick performed in front of you and be like, did your eyes deceive you? Yes. Okay, then don't trust your eyes.
Right.
It's not something that works all the time. But if intuition wasn't a, to use a word Miller and then frown at, essential to our survival, it wouldn't still be, we wouldn't still be here, since that
Right.
intuitive sense seems to be so important. I mean, you think about the state of our politics, it's nothing but intuition, to where people are then running out to find things to back that up. So if you take Toss class Memencog,
Right.
he takes from that book, The Righteous Mind, from Jonathan Haidt, his metaphor of the elephant and the rider. And it's such a beautiful inversion to me, because the elephant is our intuitive side, the rider is our thinking side. And in the Bodhisattva, he talks about the elephant of the mind.
Right.
What is amazing to me, and why I say it's a beautiful inversion, is, as Miller talks about, the reptilian complex, which is also a big part of our fight or flight with the amygdala and such, is small,
Yeah.
but the thinking part, the neocortex, is bigger.
Yeah.
And yet it's the smallest thing that is the elephant of our brain, and the rider that is the biggest part. The smallest part in the metaphor is the biggest part of our brain.
Right.
But anyway, he talks about how, to your point, the elephant will take a step in a direction, and immediately the rider is just justifying why that is the best way to go. Not that it is the best way to go, just why it is the best way to go. Which, evolutionarily speaking, as he points out, makes sense. If you're saying this is where I need to go in order to survive, it wouldn't be beneficial to you if your brain was constantly questioning if this is where it should go.
Right.
Because then you'd never get anywhere.
Wasted energy.
Yeah.
And maybe that's draws on to the narrative deriving parts of the brain coming from that confirmation. We need to, as quickly as possible, justify what we just did. So not only are we going to use this new tool that we have in our back pocket called language, but we're going to use language to name and recall the things we have done to make a narrative to the things we are doing and what we might do in the future. Which is interesting, because that's very individualistic.
Yes.
But what we just talked about, that language has a very social aspect to it. And so on what level does language develop on that end versus the self or the social accountability that happens through language itself, through, well, I wouldn't say contemporary debate, but what debate should be, and argument and conversation and dialogue and inquiry, that what we're doing right now, we're using language as a means of confirming or denying or interacting ideas that in and of themselves are language models within our individual brains coming out within a social sphere.
Right. Yeah. Well, and Jonathan Haidt mentions in the book that it turns out the best way for us, the best way for a community or even an individual to survive is to actually talk with others, to have them challenge your rapidly rationalized conclusions. I've talked with you about how I have several friends that will rationalize what is going on around them or what they think, and then instead of asking if that's wrong, they immediately just start asserting that that's the case. I can give you a really good example of this. Not saying that I support any of this. I'm very much a centrist, but Donald Trump and anyone that supports him is called a fascist or a Nazi. But what's interesting is people on the right will call those on the left also Hitler, fascist, Nazi, or communist. And yet there's no evidence on either side that they can actually show that it follows the same political philosophy or governmental structure that is happening, because Hitler immediately removed any ability to go against the authority that was created. It was consolidated. Trump hasn't done that. You talk about the Democrats being called communist. Since when have they constantly been doing a redistribution of wealth?
Right.
If you actually look at all the data, ever since the Democrats have held the most positions of power in our government since FDR.
Oh, wow.
And yet they have consolidated money that the top 20% of our country earners own 78%, 72 to 78% of the wealth. So what about this is communist or fascist? So it turns out it's just a metaphorical term to say we don't like where this is going.
Yeah.
And to give another specific example, you had people calling Trump a fascist and a Nazi. And then people would find out that Germany also had a slogan, "Make Germany Great Again," or something along those lines. And we're like, see?
Right.
And then recently, people have been finding photos of KKK rallies where they said, "Make America Great Again," and justifying this as the evidence that Trump and his regime is fascist, white supremacist, and Nazism. The funny thing is you can be a white supremacist and not be a Nazi.
Right.
It's very difficult to be a Nazi and not be a white supremacist, though. But what's so interesting about it is, so does that mean any phrase or anyone that uses something, "We should make this better, we should make this great again," is a Nazi? Is a fascist? The logic falls apart at that point.
Right.
If you and I walk into a company and say, "Hey, this company used to be one of the best in the world, let's make it great again," does that make us fascists? Well, according to this logic,
Right.
yes. But again, what we're seeing here is they already decided what this administration and Trump was, and then they went and found evidence to confirm that. Just as I had shown, the right has found things like Bernie Sanders being a candidate, Pelosi and them talk about what is it called, where they want to pay out a huge check to
retribution. Not retribution.
I can't remember, but anyway. Has it happened? No. And yet it's constantly got them elected, and it's constantly made people on the right side of the horseshoe call them communists.
Right.
But they haven't done it. So they're just they've already made their decision, and then they're going out and finding the evidence to prove that. So yeah, to your point, it seems as the research for thinking and moral foundations has found, we make a decision, the elephant steps in a direction, and then immediately our brain finds justification for that.
Which is, connecting this further, completely contrary to what we had discussed earlier, talking about how one dismisses everything that has happened and is only focusing on what is now.
Yeah.
That is completely an antonym of what we're just talking about, where somebody is introspectively looking back on what they have done or what has happened, trying to prove what is happening now. I'm so glad that we're talking about this, because one of the things I had a conversation with somebody on today is the word clearly. Clearly, this is the way that it should be, or clearly they didn't know what they were doing. Somebody pointed out to me, and it was kind of just like getting struck by lightning, how interesting a phrase that is. To say, well, clearly they knew that they were not doing the right thing. Well, if they did the wrong thing, clearly it wasn't that clear. And so, within the context of this conversation, one has this self-confirmation go on, and then they look at the context of another, doing something that's not in line of their confirmation of their narrative,
Yeah.
of their egoic narrative. And then they say, clearly, this is what it should be.
Yeah, it's very ethnocentric,
Right.
if you know it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's, in psychology, in-group bias, which is where we're very quick to see our group as good people, doing the right thing. Any information that's good, we're quick to accept. Any information or claims that is negative, we're quick to dismiss. And I find that fascinating. For instance, Nietzsche talks about in Genealogy of Morals that all is perspective, which means it's just all interpretation. Okay, he's not wrong, but to your point, this concept of clearly what they did, they knew was wrong. It's like, well, that's a perspective, that's an interpretation, and because it's a perspective, you don't know that.
Right.
That's like trying to prove intent.
Yeah.
Good luck with
Yeah.
that. Unless they outright voice their intent, you can't prove that.
Right.
So, yeah, no, I completely agree. It's such a interesting way of looking at it. And to me, that does show a group bias. And I wonder how much our politics, with its culture and how we operate, is an influence on that. Because I would argue our political system, well, let's think about it. What is the best way to get people in our culture to vote for you? We are the party of virtue and of morality. It's very Manichaean dualism. We are good, they are evil. And it's just trying to fight over who's really evil and who's really good. So, for instance, that statement, clearly what they did, they knew was wrong. And it was like, do kids always know clearly what they're doing is wrong? No.
Because nobody would ever make a mistake then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which to your point, kind of shows the oxymoronic absurdity of the word clearly.
Right.
And to me, that seems to be, apparently this is actually some theories, I would call it a weaponization of words. It's trying to impose this is virtuous, and it's obvious to everybody that this isn't the case. And Jonathan Haidt's work, he said that they created a bunch of moral context that had no harm in it, because most ethics is about harm. For instance, a story of a family's dog dies, and instead of burying it, they decide to eat it. Is there anything immoral about this? Dog's not being harmed, the people aren't being harmed, and yet immediately people would immediately go to a social convention, not an ethic, about it being wrong. This shouldn't be allowed. And they would come up with excuses such as, well, maybe they'll feel sick afterwards. So, in other words, they're not looking at the context, which is, has anyone been harmed? They're trying to create a victim of harm,
right,
even though there's none in the scenario. And it's like, okay, so if individuals, again, to this point, are constantly creating their justification and looking for things to back up their justification, the word clearly is a problem. So Jonathan Vervaeke says that we have a salience landscape, is how he describes it, which is salient, what's important, noticeable, or of value to you. And he says if something does not fit into your salience landscape of what you already have in there, you don't integrate it. If even parts of it, I can't do it for our listeners, but let's say I have 4 fingers up and 4 fingers up on my other hand that you can join together, right? Pull down your 3rd finger and try and fit your hand together. It doesn't work as well, but that's how our salience landscape works with how we integrate new ideas. Is if there are some parts we agree with, but maybe this 3rd finger we don't agree with, we'll take it off and be like, see, it fits perfectly. Even though it's like, does it?
Right. And so not only are we we're confirming ideas and knowledge with our own scheme, but we're bastardizing them to fit it.
Yes. Yeah, hence the whole claiming Trump and his administration, which now, especially compared to the first administration, has way more diversity in it than it did the first time, in terms of people of different culture and color. And yet he's still a Nazi and a fascist, and people immediately went out and found signs of the slogan "Make America Great Again" or "Make something great again" from terrible people to then justify this is the case. But we've, to your point, completely removed the context. And again, to the logic, if that means anyone who makes the slogan "Make something great again," does that mean they're all this? That's a dangerous precedent to set. Again, that's where it's this idea of like policing words.
Well, and in kind of broadening our perspective on this a little bit too, I don't think people are using that true delineation of logic correctly. Because what you're doing in that instance is that you're taking a set of rules and you're applying it to a different circumstance. I don't think people are doing that correctly. And like, to take the dying dog example.
Or dead dog.
Right. Deceased animal. What are they immediately going to? And is it a problem of them, there not being the existence of a true observance of what's happening? Or is it a problem of a lack of edifying people as to how to do that? Because I can think of many people in my life that would immediately go to that social aspect of that dilemma rather than the ethical one. Is that a problem of... I'm arguing that that's more so a problem of them not being edified into the application of ethics per a circumstance.
Yeah, I would agree. And then I would also correct and say it's not logic, it's fallacy.
Right.
Because for the individual in the circumstance to say they'll feel bad later.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you're appealing to emotion. You're appealing to disgust. I had a conversation yesterday with my sister where she was going, well, it's still logical. And I was like, no, it's not. And she goes, yes, it is. I was like, I think the word you're looking for is strategic. And she goes, well, what's the difference between strategic and logical? I was like, well, something can be strategic and not logical. And she goes, how? And I said, do you really think Hitler's plans in the war, especially at the end, were logical? I mean, it led to the end of the Third Reich, thankfully.
Yeah.
If I'm, for instance, appealing with that example of, well, let's think about this. What emotions does Nazi, KKK, and racists elicit? Disgust.
Yeah. Hate.
Yeah, and hate. So if I can immediately compare someone to something else, which is a reinforcement of my thinking, my conclusion, I don't have to, if I can just appeal to someone's emotion of disgust, they're not going to actually look into those individuals' arguments to find out what they believe. They're not even going to question my motives to my opponent, because immediately there is that genetic response of disgust, which we've usually used to stay away from something that could be a threat to our survival.
Which taps into the tiny elephant of the amygdala rather than the massive rider of the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really interesting. And really interesting that and this lends more so to the which came first, the language deriving out of emotion and intuition, trying to describe it, that would have a stronger pull, a stronger immediate pull to one, as it would be, I use this term lightly, more fundamental in their development, as it would have come first. There would have been more time for that amygdala emotion-centered neurology to be concrete rather than our prefrontal cortex that takes decades to fully develop. And so not only are you're fighting an uphill battle when somebody throws a demonizing or weaponizing narrative, is that that narrative not only is hateful and hurtful in and of itself, but it actually doesn't, to your point, it doesn't respond in the prefrontal cortex first. It responds on the emotional level, which is so cool and kind of adds depth to what we're talking about, because I have painted this very linear picture of emotional to the logical, but words can actually interact with the intuitive and the emotional prior to interacting to the logic.
Well, what they found with these studies in his book, The Righteous Mind, was they had people come in with fMRI scans. And when people were asked issues that had to deal with moral choices and such, they immediately saw flaring up in areas that had to do with emotion, not thinking first. So to your point, yeah, it turns out that even though it's developed that way, which means, to your point, language came last in the string of what we're laying out, it still means that when words go in, they're still interacting with the intuitive first, which again, it would make sense because, as Miller and many others had put it, I'm going to break it very simplistically, and it's not absolutely correct. It's believed that the reptilian complex, which is this tiny little ball in the bottom middle of your brain, was our first brain, evolutionarily speaking. And then you had the development of the lymphatic node, which is where emotions started to really develop. The reptilian complex was solely just fight or flight, and then you had the neocortex develop after. Okay, well, it would then make sense based off of that fight or flight and emotion will always be the primary responses first. They've been around the longest and the biggest part that has helped us survive, and the thinking last. This is why we can't go back to bring back in the Matrix with post-structuralism as such. We can't go back to the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment believes that we can overcome that and just be purely rational beings.
Right.
By the time of, I can't remember who I was listening to, but by the time, it was Ryan Chapman's video on Zionism, and he was talking about how during the time just before and during Hitler, but specifically before, during Richard Wagner, which would have been before and during Hitler, how the Germans had participated in fighting for Jews to be able to have the right to join the Enlightenment societies. And it was believed that we had evolved already to being more rational species because of this Enlightenment mindset, this modernist mindset. Well, what was then found, and Wagner even points this out in some of his works, is that Germany fought really hard to allow the Jews to exist, to be in an Enlightenment world. But then when they came to Germany, the Germans had a hard time integrating them into their society and found them to be of disgust because of their cultural practices, which is then what would go on to influence and what we would know to be the Nazistic ideal of anti-Semitism, which is where we get the word racist and anti-Semitist.
And to kind of paint a metaphorical picture of this, that words are the poisonous arrow that emotions or the amygdala knocks in its bow. That the amygdala and the emotional sphere of the brain can channel and weaponize words to influences somebody else's emotional sphere and center to create notions such as anti-Semitism, racism. That's the poisonous arrow itself.
Yep.
And it doesn't actually sustain itself prefrontally, but infects one, that the poison goes into one's emotional sphere.
Right.
affecting their emotions, causing mutual hate.
Yes. And this is why I would argue this is why Nietzsche talks so strongly on mob mentality.
Yeah.
If the Enlightenment really succeeded and was true, this thing you just described, which is what influences mob mentality, would not be such a dominant factor in how a culture makes decisions when any life-threatening issue comes up or perceived life-threatening issue comes up. So yeah, again, that's why I'm in agreement with the philosophical take from the post-structuralists of the Enlightenment is dead.
Right.
We can't go back to it. And I agree that we shouldn't go back to it. And I should clarify the stuff that we have described on how the brain works is descriptive, not prescriptive. It's not talking about how the brain should work or how we should behave. It's talking about how the brain operates, how we do behave.
Right.
Just as you're talking about how words can do this. Yeah, that's a descriptive of how things happen, not what we should do. So yes, I agree. We cannot go back to the Enlightenment. But it doesn't mean that there aren't tools from the Enlightenment that are helpful. Otherwise, Western civilization and even Eastern civilizations would not have, Western civilization would not still be here, and Eastern civilizations would not have adopted these tools from the Enlightenment and Western civilization. But post-structuralism is great because, again, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are what go on to influence post-structuralism and existentialism. They point out the huge major flaws within it and then try to build something new. As we've talked about before, I think Foucault's power model is a brilliant tool. I don't think it's something one can live on, because the inherent issue with post-structuralism is it's just all about eliminating meta-narratives. But isn't something which claims we must eliminate all meta-narratives and live by this a meta-narrative?
Right.
So again, to the Wachowskis of The Matrix, this is why it's understandable to say, okay, the second movie is also showing the shortcomings of post-structuralism. You can't stand on it. It's not something like the Enlightenment that you can live on as a foundation for life. Hence why they argue you have to step through it.
Transcendental.
It's a living it, not a building on it.
Yeah, and I had a thought. Oh, I was saying that, not going too far back into Jung, but a Jungian perspective of this would be a collective shadow.
Yeah.
That collectively shadows can manifest. And that's a beautiful image because it's outside of the ego. And if anybody's read anything of Jung, knowing that the shadow in and of itself is unconscious, and so what we're talking about is an unconscious happening. And to the point of knowledge and introspective thought into the past and the idea of words, connecting all of those, a great majority of words and language's utility would be lost if there wasn't any value in the past, because a majority of words is talking about prior events. Not all of it, but a good majority. And so I guess we're just continuously destroying or dogging on the idea of there being no merit in the past. But once again, I think that there can be an incredible amount of knowledge drawn from what has happened, and words can be the weapon that charges one to hate presently from the past and also learn presently from the past. It's about what words you choose.
Yeah, I would say we're not hating or saying there's nothing to take from the past. This is why, for me, I think a new philosophy has to be adapted, but I would want it to be more pragmatic, even though in this sense it's bigger than just your everyday practical life
Right.
of every average citizen. Because to use your idea of Jung, which I think is a brilliant concept, and I think you bringing it up fits into this so well. The brilliance of post-structuralism is it is saying, well, let me lay out what Jung says. As you said, the shadow is unconscious. Therefore, if you want to actually bring the shadow and deal with those issues and to integrate it, you have to bring it into consciousness. Right. Okay, but Jung states that it's not something where you bring one issue out of the shadow, integrate it, and then it's never returning to the shadow again. It's just a constant cycle of whatever the most recent one you pulled pushes the farthest one down back into the shadow. The brilliance of post-structuralist model is it says this is how the world works. We can't trust the past because it is unconscious. It is a shadow. The shortcoming of post-structuralism, where the Enlightenment is brilliant and where conservative and liberal philosophy is brilliant, is that it says, okay, but there are things within the shadow that we can integrate that are really good and can help us. Post-structuralism is really great because it can then say, hey, you know this thing that we keep saying we've dealt with that is integrated? No. Look at the evidence. It's not conscious anymore. It's unconscious. It's in the shadow.
Yeah.
And I really think we need to abandon this idea of we must continue a post-structuralist worldview or we must return to an Enlightenment view. I think some integration of going, let's just take what works from both and move on with our lives so we can figure out whatever else it is that is unconscious that needs to be dealt with, that can bring about a new tool to help in this system.
Let's sail off into that infinite horizon, as Nietzsche.
Yes.
Well, and I actually really like this image that we're painting here, and I'll add a little bit to it because Jung's depiction of this inner world is that one has the sphere of the ego, the persona, and the sphere of the unconscious shadow, but in between them is the anima and the animus. And I love this, and I love connecting words and their meaning to the idea, because that's what we're trying to truly do here. But the anima has been perfect. The anima or animus has often been described as Sophia, meaning wisdom. And so I'm interpreting and reading through the lines a little bit here, but wisdom in and of itself is an integration of intuition, experience, and egoic cerebral knowledge.
Yeah.
And so it's through the anima, it's through this lived experience, this animation, this soulfulness, that we can even approach the shadow and find ourselves looking at it not with critique, but with that wisdom as our light in that darkness, trying to disseminate what actually is worth taking with us back out of the underworld.
Right. Well, and I want to delve into it deeper. The anima and animus is the feminine and the masculine to Jung.
Yes.
And he has a very, to your point, to me, I agree with you that it is Sophia, it's wise, because as much as Jung didn't like a lot of philosophy, the anima animus concept is very, very Aristotelian, because he's stating that if you want to be able to your point, access the shadow where you have to use this, then it means your anima, if you're a woman and you can't be too conquered by your anima, meaning your feminine side, and you can't be too conquered by your masculine side, which is the animus. It has to have a, as Aristotle calls it, golden mean.
Yeah.
because if it's too one way, then it's not you governing yourself, it's these passions that are governing yourself, which means you can't access the shadow.
And you've read Answer to Job. You're the one that recommended it to me.
Yeah.
In that, I finished it.
Brilliant book.
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite books of all time. He offhandedly describes what I've been looking for to describe the anima and animus. He just wrote it down and then moved on as the animus, which is actually represented in females, the masculine represented in the female and the feminine represented in the male. The anima representing completion, and the animus representing perfection. And the difference between the two, I encourage anybody, if they're interested in that concept, to go and read that book, because he uses it to display a wonderfully large and amazing theological, psychological argument. But wisdom looks different for different people. And
It's because it's not certain.
right, well, and maybe wisdom isn't the anima or animus in and of itself, but wisdom is the integration of the ego and the anima or animus. And so you have completion within a male's perspective. You have completion as your anima and perfection as your ego coming into sync, creating experienced wisdom. And only up until that point can you approach your shadow.
Yes.
Delving into what I would deem the pool of potential, like we're talking about with intuition, that can be infinitely high and infinitely deep.
Yeah, which is so hilarious to me in an ironic sense. I love irony.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious how much I shit on post-structuralism. Because that's pretty much their philosophy is irony. But what's so crazy to me is Jung's theory, and I handed Kyle in a book that actually has the model out, is it's very Kantian.
Yeah.
That it's system building.
Yeah.
But what's so amazing about it is Kant's whole thing, as you pointed out, is animus. Mm-hmm. It's perfection. Like, Kant's deontology does not care about world context that may change a moral or a principle.
Right.
Following the rule is more important than anything that happens because of the circumstance or the result of that principle.
Right.
Whereas the anima is more about completing and caring for something to the point that it doesn't even consider the rule. Mm-hmm. Hence why you're saying it's difficult to get to the shadow if your anima, this is why it's considered feminine, is completely overruling by the intuition and passions, or if it's only being driven by rules and perfection, which is masculine. You have to have an integration of both.
Yeah.
Which is so shocking because most people, when Jung's bringing this out, think it's ridiculous that you have not a dualism of man, you're either man or woman. It's this idea of, well, every single individual, which makes sense evolutionarily and genetically. You have, again, to go back to Dawkins, a library of genetics from both your male and female past, that you would have elements of both, but you can't access the shadow if you are being completely governed by one or the other. Exactly. And he even says that the worst, that a woman who is governed by their animus is the worst male you'll ever meet. Yeah. And that a male governed by their anima is the worst woman you'll ever meet.
Well, and it's really cool symbolically how, and I'm sure that there's symbols representing the out of balance of animus, but from my knowledge of studying the anima, you have Mary in Maya. Mary especially within the answer to Job, represents Sophia being wisdom, the healthy version of the anima. But you also have the Eastern image of Maya, the destroyer of worlds, who would be the outweighed, disintegrated version of the anima, overwhelming the person. And so too is it with perfection on the female side of things. But what an interesting thing that has been beautifully described symbolically with Mary, and then we could use the healthy version of perfection as Christ. And that's what he does in the answer to Job, is that you have, and this is all kind of escalating and coming up to a overwhelming argument in support of Catholicism on Jung's end of things within this book. But this balance of Christ, perfection, and Mary, completion, coming together in a theological system that is integrating of the self. And he uses that point to argue with the Pope kind of uplifting Mary to a very high esteemed figure. And what I really love about Catholicism is that Mary is I'll tread lightly and say this, and one of the entryways into Christ. And it's the same function of the anima to what would be also a representative of Christ would be the self, is that the anima brings the self, brings the integrated self of all these working parts coming together. But yeah, before I go on too much of a tangent of answering to Job, just go read the book. It's amazing.
It's such a good book. I need to read it again. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think out of his short novels, it's probably the best.
Right. And then he gets it all in like 80 pages. And I'm like, dude,
it's
you're crazy.
Insane. It's insane. And that's coming from someone who's read Psychology and Alchemy,
right?
Ion, and most of his other works.
Mm-hmm.
I personally thought that was, reading that book just made so many other things of his stuff make sense.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because of my Christian upbringing or what, but I don't know. I was thinking while you're talking, it actually makes more sense because I was thinking of, well, what if Dawkins was here?
Yeah. He's like, always a good third party to have in this room.
Because he would just be like, what is with all this mystical like, remove the narrative stuff and just tell us scientifically how the system works. And yet, I think what's so brilliant about Jung, I am going down the tangent, is that because it's narrative, it's so much easier to remember. I mean, I haven't read any Jung in 6 years, and yet I remember a lot of this because of the fact that he relates it to narrative stories and such, and because he's trying to show that these narrative stories have these things embedded in them.
And Dawkins, I don't know why he doesn't see that his scientific description of the same thing that Jung is symbolically describing as the same thing. It's the transmutation of language and meaning into a mutually understandable format.
It just needs to be, well, the funny thing is in a conversation where Alex O'Connor mediated between him and Peterson.
That's a funny trio.
Yeah, he had kind of mentioned that something looking at all of the compass of the Bible and such, and how it's viewed symbolically over time, scientifically would be interesting instead of looking at as these stories actually happen type thing. But to go down a different tangent real quick, and we'll return to the topic. This is one of the main reasons why I'm kind of disillusioned and sad towards Jordan Peterson, because this is his bread and butter, that made him what he is, that has helped so many people around him, and he doesn't engage in it anymore. The only time he engages in this type of discussions is his going through the Bible with other theologians, but he's not going through it the same way to the same extent that he did with Genesis with Mircea Eliade and Jung, or like he did in his lectures as a college professor in Toronto for personality,
which is interesting. And it's a lot of New Testament that he goes through now, isn't it? Or
he did one on Exodus, which I still haven't watched, because again, I have a really hard time with. Well, let me put it this way: as someone who struggles with the idea of Christianity, watching his series on Genesis was so eye-opening, where it's like, oh my gosh, it's not just like constant, here's law, animus, this is what you need to do. There was so much pragmatism to it, of that joining of completion and perfection, to say this is what you can actually get out of the Bible, even if you're not a Christian, to understand. Again, that Jungian type of research into the importance of our mythological stories and such. And yet, even though I struggle with that, I don't see there needing to be a reason that any single person brings up a topic to have to bring up a biblical analogy for it, which is what he does with almost every one of his guests now, which I don't listen to him as much as I used to.
He must be just really, really involved and like inundated with. He's just going through it. I don't know.
Parts of me feel like it's the Batman quote.
Yeah.
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Well, and I want to make a preface on this format too, that I know individuals who would be listening to a Jungian quote unquote secular description of biblical imagery, would think it as absolute hearsay and, be very mad. But I would make the argument, like, this is part of that. We're talking about meaning here, and we're talking about the transmutation of that meaning to on an individual level, but also a social level. And I am talking and speaking directly to Christians that are listening to maybe a secular discussion of Jungian descriptions of biblical theology. Does God not work in that?
Yeah.
Well,
I had a conversation with a friend once, and, there's this belief in America with many Christians, especially the charismatics and Baptists, where they believe that if America just turned to Christ, all of our solutions would be solved. And I asked him, okay, well, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, when it says that Judah was blessed, do you think every single Israelite that lived there, or those who weren't Israelites that were living there, believed in God?
Right.
Obvious answer, no.
Right.
So how was such a place blessed if not all of them would worship or believe in God? Well, it's because they understood the value of the community, the shared beliefs that they had. And even the ones that didn't still had some, to use Locke, even though it's like thousands of years later, some tacit complicity or acceptance to the rules that were there. So to your point, I don't see why that's a problem. And if you believe that God is a part of everything, you would then think that that would be the case.
Right.
But what's so fascinating to me is I've learned more about biblical teachings having Alex O'Connor, who's an atheist, talk to theologians and scholars of the Bible or any religious text than I have listening to just a Christian or two Christians in a conversation. Right. Because you have someone who's going, I don't believe, as John Vervaeke calls it, all this bullshit, all this it sounds profound, but it's really just hot air that's excrement with all of its nutrients removed. For instance, I can give you a great example, the phrase, the word interprets itself. to me, this is such a BS phrase, because at face value, it sounds very profound.
Yeah.
But even at face value, really, you're saying that the Bible is opening itself, and while it's turning its own pages to itself to say, see, this there, this here, this there.
Yeah, and I would say that with that line specifically, I didn't interpret it that way. I interpreted it in terms of the word being Christ. Then Christ interprets himself, and kind of whatever that means, I don't know. But that as a side tangent. Anyway, I think that what we're also talking about, and this, I don't want listeners to think that we're going on a tangent. I think this is really integral to this conversation of emotional, intuitive experience versus cerebral knowledge experience, and the communication and or discommunication between the two. This watered down Western Christian doctrine that has been proliferated so heavily onto people, the kind of stuff that sure is really good for Sunday school when you're trying to teach fundamental concepts to kids that are developing minds, but in no way have I seen this Western dogma of Christianity expand into the broader sense that it truly is. And I am particularly drawn to the East, but you also see within social spheres that Eastern related Christianity, Orthodox Catholicism, is going up in membership, and Protestantism is going down.
Correct.
Because you have this need and necessity for more that's not being given on the purely Western Christian level.
Right.
And I would say maybe that's a lack of intuition. It's the lack of the mystic. It's the lack of the emotional, not saying immature, but emotional in terms of integrated into something larger that's not in the hyper cerebral version of what Christianity that has been.
Yeah, I would agree. It's probably more of a perfection animus mindset,
Yes.
which doesn't mean that there's no passions or emotion involved. It means that is the thing that then governs,
Right.
which will result in the behaviors and emotions that come out. Because a great example to give outside of the one I just gave is, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with self-proclaimed Christians who will say, when having a conversation, this is what the word says, and then I'll ask, where does it say that? And then when we get down to the nitty-gritty of, does it actually
Right.
say it that way of what you're claiming? They'll go, well, I don't know, but God knows, and that's what I'm resting in.
That's an appeal.
And it's like, okay, the problem with that statement, again, it sounds profound,
Right.
but it's not, is if God knows and you don't, then you shouldn't be proclaiming what something is, because at that point, to go to your point with the rise in even Western Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox and some of the branches of Catholicism that are on the rise, that's the whole thing of pick up your cross.
Right.
As one scholar I listened to, Dearman McCulloch, said, the whole idea of give us this our daily bread doesn't say that in Greek. It's saying something along the lines of give us the substance of the substance.
Right.
Do you know what the substance of the substance is? Okay, so maybe there's a chance that is something that is alluding to things we can't know.
Right.
But is there that God or Christ knows? And maybe that's just the thing we have to sit there and go, I don't know.
The thing of the thing.
Yeah, I don't know. And there's a chance I'm not supposed to know.
Right. And
Or that humanity is incapable of knowing.
that is a profound thing that has been lost.
Yes.
And
Hence the perfection part.
right, and you see this within Protestantism, and I'm really not trying to be on like some fiery like tangent about it, and because
My brain, burn it.
because Protestantism brings a lot of really good stuff. But it's hyper cerebral.
Yes.
Because it, and one of the examples that I'm bringing right now is that it brings too much weight onto scripture. If you go back historically, you'll see that liturgies, rituals, baptisms came much before the canonical putting together of the Bible. And this hyper, focus on scriptural doctrine versus experiential doctrine in liturgy and wisdom and ritual. Like I said earlier in this episode about elderhood, I don't think it's the catalyst for the problem, but I think it's a symptom of it. So I think that our lack of ritual within Protestant Christianity isn't necessarily the problem. It might be part of it, but it definitely is a symptom of it.
Yeah. Well, and again, I would really like to delve into this idea of the Jungian side.
Yeah.
To really delve into what we've been doing with intuition and rationality is, I think you're absolutely right, because it's amazing how much I'll hear like Baptists say that charismatics are just all feelers.
Right.
And it's like, well, the whole process of like the health and wellness or prosperity movement is that if you follow this set of criteria, you will get these rewards.
Yeah.
If you just accept this line of thinking, which is perfect, you will get these things in return. Even though there's nowhere in the Bible that says if you do carry your cross and live a godly life, prosperity is on its way. Unless you want to pick and choose some parts. But if you want to look at examples in the Bible, I don't know any prophet or any of them that had a brilliant life for following their God.
Not a peaceful end either.
Yeah. But for instance, John Lennox talked about in a podcast with Alex O'Connor that this idea of breathe life into. We in the West tend to treat, again, you can see that animist perfection mentality of it's like a math equation, very Kantian, where it's as if God put together an equation, which was this breath of life, and then life came and it was done. Whereas Lennox points out that the Greek actually leans into this idea that it's a over time breath of life, breathing, not just breath done.
Right.
So his whole argument with that was, well, that's a pretty strong argument for evolution then, because it could mean that it wasn't just boom, all this was created within the 7 days, which is more of an allegory, a metaphorical story. It could be something that took thousands, millions of years to take, because this is what was breathed as life, and it went on. And as his argument and many others have shown, it's very difficult to still believe in the Darwinian model, because when you mix the proteins that are needed to create a successful mutation, it's almost nil, impossible to have a successful mutation. So that would point in the eyes that it would be more out of design than out of just pure happenstance, which would explain my confusion is, okay, well, since we have had civilizations, talking about ancient Greece, Rome, for just over 2,000 years, how come the brain hasn't adapted to this yet?
Yeah.
It just doesn't, especially at the scale we're at, it just doesn't seem to be able to cope and adapt with it very well at all. Because we're seeing, to your point, well, let me back up. When you look at the 2000s, which I would say was the last renaissance of, what do they call it, evangelicalism of Christianity, because movie industries dominated by Christian films. Music industries, most of metalcore was Christian bands. Most of these bands don't claim to be Christian anymore. And the majority of the film industry and the music industry was built off of the charismatic model, which is this idea of very much feeling, but it's to your point, in line with this perfection mentality.
Yeah.
If you just follow this. Like, I remember being in a band, and then the singer was like, hey, this person at my church is wanting to put together a spoken word band, and they're looking for a guitar player. Would you want to come with me and try out? So I did, and me and this girl got along really well, and we played. And then we drove back to his house, and we were just hanging out, putting an end to the day. And he gets a call from her, and he just puts her on speakerphone, thinking, well, it's probably going to be about this,
right?
And she's probably going to want to talk to you. So if I tell her you're here. And immediately the first thing she goes is, hey, has he accepted the Holy Spirit? And he goes, what? And she's like, has he accepted the Holy Spirit? And he looks over at me, and I go, I've accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior and believe God is the creator of the world. And he goes, and he repeats that to her, and she goes, yes, but has he accepted the Holy Spirit? And he's just so confused, like, this is a thing?
Right. I wasn't aware of this one on the agenda.
Yeah. And she was just like, well, I've just been getting this feeling that he hasn't accepted the Holy Spirit, and I believe God is telling me that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. So again, you can see it's very perfectionist based,
yeah.
But it is what leads to this emotional state that they are in, which is to Jung's point. If it's outbalanced by something, it creates
right
an emotional response. Just as if it's too emotional, it does create the way we think in response. So yeah, I would definitely agree with you that is what has led to the downfall of Protestantism.
Yeah.
Compared to the Catholic and Orthodox Church, which is reconnecting itself more with the early church fathers.
Yes. And once again, drawing on the past to inform the present and the future. I would say these concepts aren't isolated in themselves, but manifest simultaneously when you have hyper-perfectionism. It's not focused on the complete picture.
Yes.
It's focused on the model.
Yes.
And so you have no sense of integration into what has happened. I'm looking back on the experiences I've had with Orthodoxy. What a beautiful historical detailed timeline they have. The honoring of martyrs and prophets and all these people that have come before them, saints. This is another reason why saints are venerated, is it's because it's that honoring and respecting of the gold that, to use the language of this conversation, that Christ and God has manifested in times past to inform our present experience, so we can hopefully re-experience that same gold,
right,
that Christ manifested before.
Right. Well, and again, the whole point of a saint is not that they are becoming Christ or God.
No.
It was more of, with all their flaws, look at what they achieved.
Yes.
In the name of what they pursued and what they were able to do. And therefore, that's an example of showing people, see, these are things you can take with what you are good at, even with all your shortcomings, and go after.
And it was put really poignantly to me one time that, we were created in the image of likeness as God, and with the fall we lost our likeness. Saints and Christ retrieved their likeness, and this is the
interesting
idea of theosis, the mergence of one becoming God, lower G, integrated with God, uppercase G.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, to go back to your point, this is where I think the postmodern model is so brilliant, because we can analyze the Protestant movement and show all these things you're saying, if we did this,
right,
it would create this. Is that happening? Has that happened? No? Okay, well then that shows that we can't even delve into the shadow to keep this theme of connecting with Jung, because we're not even aware there's a shadow, again, unconscious,
Right.
that is causing a problem here. Again, hence this notion of everyone just accepted Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior, the nation would be blessed and basically be kingdom of heaven on earth. Which is like, well, looking at history, we already know what happened when people tried to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. And it ended up in more than one crusade.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying the first crusade was that goal,
Right.
but after that is what I'm thinking, like the Lionheart,
Yeah.
leading to that. So again, you have a great understanding of, okay, well, what is the post-structuralist model trying to say? Post-structuralism is saying it's all just perspective. It's agreeing with Nietzsche. It's all just intuition and what I feel about the world.
And it's
funny thinking about this. I'm having
Yeah.
a revelation, which is post-structuralism is too much anima. Enlightenment is too much animus.
Yes. And well, and I was just about to say, as soon as you said that, is that post-structuralism is the coming out of hyper-perfection and the hyper-animus nature. And so, sure, it's an emotional lack of formless response that is anima, but that's not a bad thing, because what we're trying to do here within this entire meta system of interworkings of emotional intuition and cerebral knowledge is balance, integrate. And so when you have a disintegration and imbalance of hyper knowledge, hyper structuralism, the response unconsciously, intuitively on a social and individual level is going to be hyper emotionalism, hyper formlessness, intuition. And so, of course, that exemplifies itself in a dismemberment from the Protestant movement and a continued reintegration with something that is more experiential, something that is more mystical, and that would be Eastern Christianity and the like.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I'm saying I've been told it's something I should just do. Why I say we just need a new philosophy. And it needs to be one that, last time I talked about, it's like a pendulum, just going back
Right.
and forth and back and forth. The fear is that what's happening right now is a push to try and go back to the Enlightenment,
Yeah.
which is just the pendulum moving right in this case. But that doesn't solve anything if we just keep doing this, especially to keep with Jung and Aristotle's idea of a golden mean.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, okay, well, too much animus is what led to World War II, you could argue. And too much anima is what's led to almost the fall within Western civilization in on itself.
Right.
So it seems we need to move on and go, okay, well, the animus post-structuralism is very, very helpful. It's here for a purpose. It functions well. So does elements of the Enlightenment. So maybe we should just balance these two out to the golden mean and move within that golden mean area of whatever is needed for the context, so we're not completely overrun by one of them.
Right.
And then move on to whatever the next thing is. I just think the reason why such a philosophy would be considered pretty boring is that would mean you would have a giant book that will lay out, here's all the great things about this, here's all the great things about this, here's the type of context it could be used for, with your discretion, again, being pragmatic, but then trying to build something new off of that, of a different direction to go, knowing that it's going to fall short.
Well, and let's learn from our past and learn from our past.
Yeah.
Because what we haven't done is looked back upon this continual pendulum swing and coming out of it once again into something else, which is a rare time to be in.
Yeah.
Yet not a rare time, because it's happened so many times.
It's same but new.
Right. we need to do what we failed to do and say yes and, not either or.
Yeah.
Yes and is the gateway to to Sophia.
Yeah.
To wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. No, my only problem with it is why I say it's going to have its shortcomings is it would be foolish to think that a new philosophy which takes both of these to create a middle ground is going to solve all the problems
Right.
after millions of years and thousands of years of philosophy, specifically thousands of years of philosophy and hundreds of years to thousands of years of science. I get the sense, and this is why I can't stand the phrase being on the right side of history.
Yeah.
Because it's like,
Good luck with that.
how do I know how the future is going to judge me now?
Right.
I can think about that all I want, but I guarantee the USSR thought that history would think favorably of them in the future.
Uh-huh.
Same with the Nazis.
It's almost a collective self-confirmation.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So for me, it's like, okay, I have the feeling that regardless of what type of philosophy this would be, it's going to lean, due to my unconscious shadow and bias, more animus or anima in some way. Or if you take the past of philosophy, it's going to create a split where some people are going to take such a philosophy and go, this part is the answer, and another part going, no, that's the problem, this part is the answer.
And Jung puts it so beautifully, because he doesn't say, okay, men, women, find the animus and anima and you shall be set free. You know, that's the end. That's the philosophy that I'm proposing. He'd be rolling in his grave right now. But what he's saying is that in finding your anima or animus, you inadvertently integrate it with what you already have had to find the self, which is and this is deeply rooted in Jungian psychology, is the pleromatic side, the Ouroboros, where the snake eats its own tail, and it's infinite, and it's all opposites meeting themselves, and it's not one thing or the other, but it's both at the same time. And the only reason that people don't like that is because in and of itself it's a mystery. It's paradox. And I don't say it's a contradiction, because it's a contradiction that actualizes itself presently, therefore it's a paradox.
Right. Well, and I want to lean into something specific that you were just mentioning, which is this idea of realizing the opposite. So if you're born a male, it means depending on your characteristics, there's a higher chance you're going to be predisposed to animus than anima.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that there aren't individuals that are born male that have a tendency to end up more anima than animus.
Right.
And that's where, for me, I had laid this out in personality and TOS class, where this is a spectrum. It's a true dichotomy where there's a line between them able to move back and forth. It's not, what's brilliant to me about Jung's ideas, it's not saying that you are one or the other.
Right.
It's not dualistic. And it's kind of bringing something pretty revolutionary to the way we think, where it's like, oh, you can be a male and be anima, and if your golden mean between the two means you lean more anima, that's not a problem.
Right.
If you're female and you were born and the golden mean leans more animus, not a problem. It's all about fitting the golden mean for you to be able to integrate and function better as a human being. And this is where our society right now, and this, again, to highlight, this is a big frustration of mine for Peterson. Where is this in his talking when it comes to the LGBTQ issues?
Right.
I'm not saying that these people can't be this, can't think the way they want. But from a psychological standpoint, I would say what is really happening within the LGBTQ plus community is that you have individuals that are being plopped in a world, to your point, that has had most of social identity and any social cohesion removed.
Hyper perfection as well.
Yes, exactly. Because as I think I pointed out last time, and if I didn't, I'll reiterate, what's so great about the LGBTQ movement during the 2010s is it was showing that there was a hyper perfection, hyper animus on the idea of gender. That if you were born a male, this is how you had to behave. This is how you had to talk. This is how you had to dress. This is how you had to, the jobs you had to have. This is what you had to aspire to. When it's just like, who knows that? And what was so great about it is it was saying this is a problem. This animus perfection mentality is a problem. But what we've gotten in return isn't a joining, as you were saying, of the completion and the perfection. Instead, it's just been the completion side, very anima, very emotionally driven. And again, this is where Jordan Peterson kind of frustrates me, because you sit there and you go, okay, well, if you have someone who's a man who's really struggling with their identity and thinks they're a woman, from a Jungian standpoint, couldn't you say that that means that they are too much anima? Because they're thinking it has to be a category,
Right.
and that they need to integrate their anima into their life to really understand how things are, to get a better understanding of what they're doing. To me, this explains why having children transition at such a young age is not a good idea. Whereas
Right.
before, you couldn't really make, how do I put this? From a logic standpoint, when they say this just shouldn't happen, well, there's the problem. It's being prescriptive, not descriptive. Whereas I can say, well, based off of what we're experiencing here and how society works, we can see a descriptive problem of, well, it's because society has forced individuals that if you are born a male, this is what is expected of you. If you're born a female, this is what is expected of you. When I thought the whole goal of our society was to be able to say, whatever you are predisposed and you're good at, you should be able to pursue.
Right. Jung inadvertently and actually explicitly states that this is heavily relational.
Yes.
And I want to kind of make a circle on a very previous topic that we discussed, is that this all happening is in and of itself happens on a semi-intuitive level. And when I originally posed that I don't claim a lot of my ideas because I don't think they're my own, it's the same thing. We're intuitively and relationally interacting with this inner world that expresses itself on a social realm by way of social language, which is story, which is myth, which is all
Right.
these things. So the myth isn't the thing itself, but the language of the thing. And that's a relatively reoccurring topic that we're talking about within this episode itself, is the language that we use and what we mean to communicate through the language that we utilize. And that it's incredibly relational on the ego's side, having to integrate its animus on an intuitive side, bringing in that relation that's beyond oneself.
Yeah. No, I would completely agree. And to give a few examples, I remember being in high school, I got an Xbox 360 and had to create an account for Xbox Live. And I was like, I'm going to pick a really cool name. It's going to be complete. Like, I made it up. Never been done before. So I did Z-A-E-N, Zayn.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, original. Found out several people have already done it. And it was just like, oh, okay. And then I've been working on this concept, or thinking about it a lot. And I haven't gotten to a point where I've researched it yet, but I'm working on a paper to do for a YouTube video. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this down. And before I move on with the paper, I'm actually going to do the research since my paper can actually integrate this idea. And I called it a weaponization of words. And it turns out it's already been studied.
Yep.
Already named that. So it's that classic phrase, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yep.
But at the same time, to go the paradox route, same but new.
Yeah, cerebral but intuitive.
Yeah, and also one of my favorite quotes from Heraclitus, the only constant is change.
Yeah, and what do we recognize as, kind of tying a lot of these things together, what do we recognize as our imbalance? And how do we recognize ourselves proliferating that imbalance through weaponized words, through this intuitive nature that tries to exemplify itself, creating feelings such as hate, such as a lack of passion and love, and like I said, creating that poisonous arrow, words weaponized toward somebody else, driving that same hate, and then on a collective scale. And this is described by Jung in his brilliantly profound notion of the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
I think that this is just not the underbelly of that idea, but maybe just how it consciously exemplifies itself, like the gopher that we try to hit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we should probably start, instead of analyzing this in many different perspectives, which I could do forever, to bring back the idea of, to your point, I think that's a brilliant direction, because it means we're actually, instead of just talking about this descriptively, now we can look at it prescriptively, maybe diagnosing it of what's going on and a direction to go. So for instance, to go back to that example of those on the right side of the horseshoe, I don't agree with the whole right left verbiage. I think it's too simplistic, too ridiculous. When I say right side of the horseshoe, I'm talking horseshoe theory, which is middle of the horseshoe is liberalism, just to the top of the right is conservatism, very bottom of the horseshoe on the right is fascism, very bottom on the left is communism, just to the top left of the horseshoe is liberalism, which would mean in between liberalism and communism is democratic, or in between, sorry, it's not liberalism, it's socialism at the top left. So just between the middle, which is liberalism, and socialism, you would have democratic socialism. And then libertarian is somewhere in, it depends on what you think of it. But anyway, when you think about those on the righter side of the horseshoe calling those on the left side of the horseshoe of the entire spectrum communists, when really what they're just saying is we don't like the direction this is going, or those on the left side of the horseshoe calling those on the right side of liberalism of the horseshoe Nazis, fascist. I think, to your point, that would allude that there is something of a collective unconscious and a collective shadow that is happening, that both sides, in other words, as you and I have talked about before, and I love to say, I remember growing up and being told that the thing that separated Christianity from everything else was Christ is the only figure in a religious setting that ever died for people. And then I got to dabble in Greek mythology, Norse mythology, and you find out Perseus sacrifices his life for people. And you're like, okay, sure, he may not have died, but he is a demigod and he does this. So if both of them are saying the same thing, I don't think the question should be which one is right.
Right.
The question that is best to be asked is, why are they both have similarities? So for instance, with this issue politically, and just like the Enlightenment accusing post-structuralism criticizing rationalist Enlightenment thinkers, it's showing that there is a huge amount of unrest and that there is an issue that is being grappled with collectively, both unconsciously as a collective unconscious and as a shadow that needs to be dealt with. And to kind of bring in our points of Jung, which I think has been a great conduit for these ideas, it seems like, to reiterate, there is a huge issue of the animist side saying, no, I am correct.
Right.
And the anima side saying, no, I am correct. When in reality, that is preventing us from even addressing the issues that are going on. Because what amazes me is I'm centrist. I may have a foot pointed towards the right side of the horseshoe. I have a friend of mine who is centrist but has a foot pointed towards the left, specifically democratic socialism. And I have another acquaintance who is more socialist but with a foot pointed towards communism. And it's amazing having things sent to me from them, and you realize, for instance, Francis Fukuyama, who was a big neo-conservative during the 90s, made this foolish statement that the rational endpoint, Hegelian, I guess I should clarify, Hegel believes that all of the world is ending to a rational endpoint. It's all building to something. So he was using this Hegelian idea that all political systems rationally end with democratic liberalism. All of them. I think that's a very stupid statement because, as we saw, neoliberalism under Bush and such collapsed. Anyway, he's moved more to social democrat. And it's amazing how much of the issues are in agreement on both sides. And yet they don't want to talk about the things that they're in agreement are an issue, or in agreement of the things that they share in values. They just always want to talk about, again, just like the terms communist, fascist, Nazi, it's metaphorical of just saying, we don't like the direction you're going. But it's like, well, how can you decide which direction they're going if we don't have a conversation about it?
Well, and there's a kind of a predisposition to that conversation that needs to happen first. And one of my favorite writers and thinkers, and I would say mystics, Richard Rohr, he's a Franciscan priest, and I would recommend anybody to read the number of books that he's published. He has stated really elegantly that the mystical individual looks at something not in terms of what it should be, but what it is first. And in its totality, forgives it for what it is and accepts it for what it is. And only from that point can those conversations be had. Because anything else is illusion, is Maya.
Yeah.
Is hyper animus. And leads to the dualism that we've been kind of inadvertently talking about for this episode to the nth extent.
Yeah. Yeah, I would add to that. I think that's brilliant that I'll use the gaming world as an analogy. There's a lot of upset to what the AAA industry is doing because it's creating a managerial corporate or capitalism, which is so in a free market society, it's supposed to be the responsibility of value is placed on the producers, the developers, because they're making the product. Therefore, they need to create something of value to which the market will be in demand for. If the market doesn't demand it, well, they have no authority to say, you must buy this. Managerial capitalism is inverted. It makes it to where the priority of value is the burden of the consumer, meaning we don't have to create anything of value. You are the one that creates the value in the product. So this is a huge issue where the gamers are complaining about the things that they're getting from it. It's like, okay, but to your point, it needs to be accepted as is, because for some reason there's this mindset of thinking, well, by saying what I don't want, clearly, to bring that back, they'll know what I want.
Right.
Which, to your point, is not accepting things as it is. That's just Maya. It's destructive, because it's just saying, you're destroying everything I love about this industry, and therefore I'm going to rip to shreds everything I don't like what you've done to destroy what I love. And therefore somehow from that you'll know what I want and what needs to be created out of it. When, to your point, that should be just accepted as this is how it is. We should be able to lay out why this is a problem, but then be able to say, now that kind of like what we've done with the conversation, laying out the problem between this view of either the Enlightenment or post-structuralism, being able to go, okay, well, there has to be something for us to do next. And then being able to analyze and say, well, here's the damages that come out of this of going too animal or too animus. And that if we need to be able to make it fit in the middle to this golden mean, the gaming industry, same, needs to realize the consumer specifically. You need to lay out articulately how it is, being descriptive. Then be prescriptive about this is what we actually want to go in the direction of. Even if that means, what's so sad about that is people are going to think that means, okay, well, if it's 88% of the gaming community that wants the old style and 22% of a modern, quote, audience, unquote, that wants this new style, we should just abandon the 22%. Well, no, that's not what that means. What that would mean is, since the 88% is dominant, which is the market, the AAA industry should tailor to that. But it doesn't mean it should never create any products for that niche group of the taste of the 22%.
Yeah, and I think that our propensity to not see things as they truly are and see things as we want them to be seen, either as idealism or demonization, is a product of hyper animus perfectionism that came from this structuralism, trying to kind of place these ideas together. And then coming out of that structuralism into post-structuralism, we have this hyper anima, which is very feeling oriented, which then Maya comes through, the chaos feminine comes through, destroy, not even necessarily looking at things not as what they are, but as what we want them to be, either demonized or perfectionized, but destroying that which is not the thing that we want to see.
Right.
And so it's going even a step further and not even saying, well, I see this. It's going that next step further and saying, I see this and this is all that there is.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, the Enlightenment mentality, which is very perfection, the completion part being integrated, to your point, is saying it is all down to interpretation. For instance, you said the flaw of being able to see things for how it is. Well, that's what perfection is trying to obtain, is just see things for how it is. Adding completion into it, the anima, is saying you'll never know exactly, unquote, quote unquote, how it is. And that is what you have to grapple with. Again, to use the gaming industry example, the 88%, which is the majority of the market, does not know what they want. They do not know exactly what the problem is. Otherwise, whenever they bring up an issue, they would be able to actually articulate and explain why it's an issue and why it's not something they want to sell. It's coming out immediately, which doesn't sound perfectionist, and just saying, it doesn't fit my taste. I don't want to eat it. Get it away from me. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why the phrase, the customer is always right in matters of taste. But I would say that principle also goes to the production, the means of production, which is, okay, if the games industry is constantly wanting to make something for the 22%, that's their preference of taste.
Mm-hmm.
The problem, as you were pointing out, is they're not seeing it for how it really is. The completion is brilliant because it points out perfection can't see it how it really is. The problem is it creates a different form of this is how it really is.
Right.
It creates a world of it's all interpretation and perception and perspective. That's everything is. Mine is more important than everybody else. It creates a new form of this is how it really is.
And a hyper completion.
Correct, because the problem with that mentality that we see with the gaming industry is they're complaining that the 22% is not enough to keep the industry afloat. And therefore the 88%, this is hypothetical, is required to, because remember the value is being placed on them rather than the product, to purchase the product.
Yeah, and now I want to connect this to, just in terms of summation, connect this to what we had previously discussed in terms of the completely deceased dog. How the individual doesn't look at what it is. That's what we're talking about here, is these inner underpinnings and underworkings of the, Jung would say unconscious, the theologian would say the spiritual, I don't know who else would say what else, but there's a million names and a million faces for this same thing that are causing this lack of connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal, the emotional and the contemplative. And how do we connect them? And I think what we're both positing is that it's by way of integrating the opposite, bringing it together to a true completion, to a Ouroboros itself, to a full circle, and then only then can you actually see the whole picture.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to end it too, and you can comment on it, but I think on top of that, the Ouroboros is so good because it's self-devouring.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I have anything else to add on that.